This is PV Magazine Live. I'm Christian Roseland, America's editor at PV Magazine, and we're here at the Solar Power International Trade Show in Las Vegas. I'm joined by Ravi Manghani, the Director of Energy Storage at GTM Research. Ravi, thanks for talking with me.
Thanks, pleasure's mine.
So Ravi, in the most recent energy storage monitor, I note that the Q2 number was impressive, 41 megawatts, but it was also only a 1% growth year over year from Q2 of 2015. Now, obviously the energy storage market is supposed to grow very rapidly, but this seems a bit bumpy. What's going on here?
Well, as with any new market or new nascent technology such as energy storage, there are going to be some ups and downs, and there are a few indicators that do help us, sort of take that with the right spirit. One of them actually being the fact that although the market grew only 1% year over year, there was definitely an upward swing quarter over quarter since Q1. At the same time, the behind the meter segment continued to grow at a good, healthy rate. The front of the meter on the flip side it was one of the reasons why the annual growth wasn't as high, but that's also an indication that the market is diversifying in terms of in front of the meter deployments. So for instance, the largest deployment in Q2 was not in fact in California or PJM, it was in the MISO territory in the state of Indiana. So we'll take a slow but steady growth as long as the market is diversifying and there are opportunities for companies to grow, as well as for storage to play a role in helping the grid to become cleaner, more resilient and efficient.
But okay, so 1% year over year, Q2 2015 to Q2 2016. But what are we seeing in terms of the overall growth curve here?
Oh, totally right. The key sort of trend here is that storage is being looked upon as a valid or a feasible technology to help solve grid issues. So the arc for growth for the rest of the year, in fact, is pretty steep. A lot of it is driven by the Alyssa Canyon procurement that were just recently announced. So we are going to see about 37.5 megawatts, 150 megawatts of storage getting deployed in the SE Genie territory, as well as about 27 megawatt and 140 odd megawatt hours of. Can I take that? Can I repeat that?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. So we are going to see 37.5 megawatts and 140 megawatt hours in SDGNE, as well as 27 megawatts in the SE territory in the next 6 to 8 months. A lot of those projects wouldn't have been possible or wouldn't have been imaginable even a year ago, but it clearly is an indication that the industry is growing and maturing enough to react to an emergency event such as the Alyssa Canyon gas leakage issue.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. You brought up a number of things here that are interesting, a number of dynamics, but I want to take this conversation for a moment in the direction of technology. Now, when I've talked to you about past energy storage monitor reports, you've indicated that high 90-some% of the energy storage deployments are actually lithium-ion batteries. And yet I talk to other energy storage companies here, and I get very interesting conversations with some of the companies that have alternative technologies to lithium-ion. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect to see over the future with lithium-ion versus alternative technologies, and and how long you expect lithium-ion to dominate?
Sure. I think the trend here is multi-layered, right? One, at the very basic level, the fact that lithium-ion technology has been dominating for all grid applications is because it's a technology that has matured and has been commercial for the last 30 plus years. So a lot of the financiers and developers are comfortable with investing in lithium-ion. Now, if you flip the question around and say, let's talk about different applications and think about what's the most optimal or the most cost-effective and technically sound technology for each application, you probably won't come out with lithium-ion as being the solution for each and every application, especially for some of the long duration applications which go 4, 6, 8 hours long, where where technologies like aqueous solutions or sodium-based chemistries or even flow batteries for that matter are probably better suited. But then again, the question comes back to are financiers willing to stand behind those technologies that don't have such a long history or track record of performance?
Now, to go over to market deployment for a moment, clearly California has been a leader because of AB 2514. Obviously, there's been a tremendous amount of energy storage put on the PJM interconnection grid in the Northeast because of specific policies there. But one of the things that I found that was really interesting about your recent energy storage monitor was that you indicated a diversification of the market, and that there's other states that are coming up and other grid regions that are really starting to develop in terms of a battery market. Can you talk about which of these regions you find to be the most interesting?
Sure, and I'd like to split that answer into two buckets. One is, let's talk about what's happening in the front of the meter segment, because the trends are very different in front of the meter versus behind the meter, even if the eventual markets that would show up on the map are the same. On front of the meter applications, again, going back to my previous comment, that storage is definitely being acknowledged as a good participant on the grid, and as a result of which, storage shows up in a lot of different utility RFOs and RFPs. Beyond just California, where they're mandated to do so. So, for instance, Arizona, both the big utilities in Arizona, TEP and APS, are underway or have already awarded storage to as part of their RFO or RFP programs. On the other side of the coast, in Massachusetts, which very recently has put into law a storage mandate. We don't know exactly how big that mandate would be, but that's a result of months of work at the part of the state authorities as well as other stakeholders to think about how storage can be used to make the grid better and more efficient. So there are a couple of different reasons because of which we are starting to see more storage participation in various utility activities, and of course, let's not forget cost. Right, the costs have been going down, which makes it more economically feasible for these deployments to take place. Now, shifting gears to behind the meter, the trend in behind the meter is again slightly cost driven to a certain extent, but more importantly, again the key driver, at least on the residential side in the forthcoming months, is going to be what happens with different rate reforms, which are again underway in multiple states and multiple utilities in a lot of states, and we are, whether we like it or not, moving towards a rate structure that will have a very specific time of use components in certain cases. In other cases, there could be lower value for solar. So there are a lot of elements that would make storage play a vital role in enabling end customers to self-consume and deploy PV. The trend on the CNI space is again being driven by the lower costs that are enabling CNI demand charge management become economical in several geographies, and as the cost trends keep going down, and the fact that we're not seeing that many rate structures actually staying flat or going down, they're on the contrary going up. So there are obvious crossover points where the economics for CNI demand charge management makes sense in multiple geographies.
What's interesting about this conversation, now I'm going to go back to cost here. When we talk about this, we're talking about all of these individual decisions being made by individual authorities in states, in a very sort of a linear way. But when I look in terms of the big picture of storage deployment and how it's growing, I think of the work of science fiction writer Ravi Manghani, who has talked about the exponential fall in solar module costs and exponential growth of deployment. And similarly, he's saying the similar thing is happening for energy storage. The costs are falling exponentially, and that will lead to exponential growth. Do you believe that this is a fundamental dynamic which is affecting this industry?
Absolutely right. It is. The cost trends are pointing downwards. We've seen 70 to 80% cost declines over the last 4 to 6 years, depending on who you ask that question. But predominantly, these high cost declines are enabling multiple markets to open up, and as a result of which, obviously the industry is growing as well, be it on the manufacturing side or be it on business model end. But we are definitely seeing more new or existing players sort of taking storage more seriously, and as a result of which, we are going to see growth in multiple geographies. Now the question is, are we going to grow, as you said, without any conscious or a top-down policy framework, or are we just going to keep on growing at different pace in different markets? I mean, there's a definite case to be made for a more systematic approach towards looking at locational value of storage and other DER assets, and thinking about how storage can play a role in different situations. To that end, I know Fork recently did introduce a docket that is asked all the ISOs that are under its jurisdiction to think about how storage can participate, or rather, what are the key bottlenecks or roadblocks for storage to participate in not just ancillary services market where they're required to as a result of 784 and 755, but also go beyond ancillary services market and think about how storage, and by that, not just transmission level storage, but also distributed and in some cases behind the meter storage, can enable better ISO participation in energy as well as capacity markets.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, Ravi.
Thank you.
And this is Christian Roseland with PV Magazine Live. We're here at the Solar Power International Trade Show in Las Vegas.